There's a moment, maybe you've had it, where you catch yourself in the mirror and notice something on your skin that wasn't there last week. A patch that feels rougher than it should when you run your fingers over it. A mark that shouldn't still be there, 3 days after you first noticed it. A spot you don't remember getting, and can't quite explain. You tell yourself it's nothing. Dry skin. Stress. The weather changing. Bad sleep. A new detergent. Anything with an easy explanation, because easy explanations let you stop thinking about it and get on with your day. So you look away. You get dressed. You move on. But what if your skin has been trying to tell you something for months, quietly, patiently, in a language you were never taught to read, and you've been mistranslating every single signal? This isn't a video about rashes. It's a video about a language. The language your skin uses when something deeper in the body is going wrong. Some people learn to read that language early, while it's still speaking softly. Others don't understand what it was saying until the message got so loud it couldn't be ignored anymore. Today, we're going through 10 levels of that language, from the quietest whisper almost no one notices, to the moment the body stops whispering and starts demanding to be heard. Each level builds on the one before it. Nothing here is random. By the time you reach level 10, you'll understand why every single stage mattered, and you'll probably recognize at least one of them from your own life, or the life of someone you love. Stay until the end. Level 10 is the one that changes how you look at your own skin for good. And here's a promise worth making at the very start. This isn't going to be one of those videos that lists 10 symptoms with no connective tissue between them, the kind you forget within an hour of watching. Every level here builds directly on the one before it. A rash you'll meet in level 2 sets up a sensation you won't understand until level 3. A pattern in level 5 reappears, transformed, in level 7. By the time you reach the end, this won't feel like 10 separate facts. It'll feel like one story, finally told all the way through. Let's start with the whisper almost everyone dismisses. Hit subscribe and leave a like. So the algorithm doesn't leave me stranded. The goal at Health Inside is 200,000 subscribers, and every single person who joins moves us closer. And if you want the full symptom map guide with visuals, symptom breakdowns, and additional resources, type symptom map in the comments, and I'll send you the link to access it. Level 1. The skin change almost everyone dismisses. It starts small. Almost embarrassingly small. You getting dressed, or reaching for lotion after a shower, or just resting your hand against your own forearm while you're half watching television, and you notice it, a patch of skin that feels different under your fingers than the skin around it. Not painful. Not even itchy yet. Just rough. Slightly raised, like the surface has quietly changed texture overnight. Like sandpaper that's been left out in the sun a little too long. You do exactly what anyone would do. You reach for lotion. You tell yourself you probably haven't been drinking enough water this week. You blame the season. Too much heat, too much air conditioning, too much dry air blowing through the vents while you sleep. For most people, that really is where the story ends. A little extra moisturizer, a little more water, and the skin settles back down within a few days. No further chapters. No documentary required. But for some people, it doesn't settle. It just waits. It fades slightly, enough to convince you it's gone, and then it returns a few weeks later in almost the exact same spot, as if it were marking its territory. Here's the wow moment most people never hear, even from their own doctors. The same glands responsible for keeping your eyes wet and your mouth moist are part of a much larger, body-wide moisture system, and your skin's surface depends on that same system more than most people realize. In Sjogrens syndrome, an autoimmune condition where the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own moisture-producing glands, dry skin isn't a separate, coincidental annoyance that just happens to show up alongside dry eyes and dry mouth. It's the same disease process, expressed somewhere you can actually reach out and touch. Dry eyes get talked about constantly in awareness campaigns. Dry mouth gets its own aisle at the pharmacy. Dry skin, technically the single largest organ in the entire body, barely gets mentioned at all, even though it may be reporting on the exact same internal problem. That rough patch on your arm was never really a beauty problem. It was the skin's version of a complaint your eyes and mouth may have already been quietly making for far longer than you realized, in rooms you weren't paying attention in. This is the skin's whisper. Quiet. Forgettable. Almost engineered to be dismissed by anyone living a normal, busy life. Think about how many small, physical complaints get filed away like this every single day, by every single person watching this video right now. A stiff neck from sleeping wrong. A headache from too much screen time. A rough patch of skin from dry weather. Each one, taken alone, is completely reasonable to ignore. That's not carelessness. That's just how ordinary life works. You can't investigate every minor sensation your body produces, or you'd never get anything else done. But this documentary exists precisely because sometimes, one of those small, easily dismissed complaints isn't isolated at all. It's the very first sentence in a much longer paragraph, and the only way to recognize that is to already know what the rest of the paragraph tends to look like. That's what level 1 really is. Not a symptom. An opening line. But sometimes, that whisper doesn't stay a whisper for long. Sometimes, what starts as nothing more than rough, dry skin can begin looking like something else entirely, something a lot of people recognize instantly, but almost never for the right reason. Level 2. The rash that pretends to be eczema. A few weeks later, the rough patch has changed shape. It's no longer just texture, now there's genuine color to it. A pink, slightly scaly rash, sitting in the crook of an elbow, or spreading along the back of a hand, or tracing the edge of a wrist. You've seen rashes like this before, either on your own skin years ago or on someone close to you, and a name arrives in your mind almost instantly, without you even having to think about it: eczema. So naturally, you treat it like eczema. A steroid cream from the pharmacy, maybe something stronger if a doctor prescribes it. And for a little while, it genuinely works. The redness fades. The scaling smooths out. You forget about it, the way you forget about most minor skin complaints once they're handled. Then it comes back. Same spot, or somewhere close to it, on the other arm this time. And this time, it brings a companion that wasn't there before: itching. Not constant. Not unbearable. But present, especially at night, right around the moment you're trying to fall asleep and your mind has nothing left to distract it from the feeling of your own skin. Here's the wow moment. Sjogrens-related skin changes and classic eczema can look almost identical on the surface, because both conditions genuinely do involve a compromised skin barrier and localized inflammation. A dermatologist glancing quickly at a photo might reasonably guess eczema either way. But the underlying cause is completely different. Ordinary eczema is very often about the skin barrier in isolation, a local problem, staying local. In Sjogrens, that same barrier breakdown is being driven by an immune system that's already agitated somewhere else in the body, which is exactly why the usual creams calm the surface down for a while, but never make the problem disappear for good. Treating the surface without addressing what's happening underneath is a bit like silencing a smoke alarm without ever checking for the fire that set it off. At this stage, the itching almost becomes a strange kind of relief. At least it's something concrete. Something you can point to, scratch, treat, name out loud to a friend without sounding dramatic. Which is exactly why the next stage catches so many people completely off guard. This is also the point where a second person often enters the story for the first time. A partner, a parent, a close friend, who notices you scratching at 3 in the morning and asks, half joking, whether you're allergic to your own sheets. You laugh it off. You blame the detergent again, or the dry winter air, or stress at work. It's an easy joke to make, because right now, it still feels like an easy problem. Because what if the itching disappears completely, and something worse quietly moves in to take its place? Level 3. When the itching stops. But the burning begins. The itching fades. You'd expect that to be good news, and honestly, for a few days, you almost let yourself believe it is. Then something stranger starts happening. The towel you've used to dry off 1,000 times without a second thought suddenly feels rough against your skin, almost abrasive, almost like it's changed its own texture overnight. The shower water, set to the exact same temperature you've always used, starts to sting in places instead of soothe. Clothing tags you never even registered before now feel like they've been stitched directly into your collarbone. This isn't itching anymore. This is burning. And burning is a fundamentally different kind of message from the body. Here's the wow moment. This shift often signals that the problem has moved from the surface of the skin down to the nerve endings living just beneath it. Chronic inflammation from autoimmune activity can affect small sensory nerve fibers, the very fibers responsible for reporting texture, temperature, and pressure back up to the brain in the first place. When those fibers become irritated or subtly damaged, the brain starts receiving distorted, exaggerated signals. Ordinary sensations, a towel, warm water, a soft cotton shirt, get misread by the nervous system as painful, even though nothing about the object itself has actually changed at all. This is often the point where people quietly start avoiding things that used to feel comforting. Warm baths, once a source of relief, get shortened or abandoned. Soft blankets get set aside. Even a partner's hand resting gently on an arm can suddenly feel like more than the moment calls for, not because that touch has become dangerous, but because the body's own messaging system has started to misfire, sending pain signals for contact that used to register as nothing at all. The whisper has become insistence now. The skin isn't asking politely anymore. It's telling you, in a language impossible to ignore at 2 in the morning, that something underneath the surface is actively inflamed. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly negotiating with your own environment, testing water temperature with a cautious hand before stepping into a shower you've used for years, checking the tag on a new shirt before deciding whether it's wearable, learning which side of the bed has the softer sheets. None of it looks dramatic from the outside. All of it is quietly reshaping how you move through an ordinary day. And just when you think you've finally understood the pattern, rough skin, then rash, then burning, the skin does something that makes the whole story even harder to explain to anyone else. It vanishes completely. And it takes all the evidence with it. Level 4. The rash that disappears before anyone believes you. This time, it isn't a slow rash creeping in over the course of weeks. It's fast. Raised, red, hive-like welts appear almost overnight, scattered across the forearms or torso, sometimes itchy, sometimes tender if you press on them, sometimes both at once. You take a photo immediately, because some part of you already suspects exactly what's coming next. You're right to suspect it. By the time you're sitting across from a doctor, describing exactly what you saw 2 days earlier, the welts are gone. Completely. Your skin looks entirely, frustratingly normal. The doctor examines you carefully, professionally, and, understandably, finds nothing to examine. This is one of the loneliest parts of any chronic condition, a symptom that behaves as though it doesn't want to be believed. You start keeping a photo log on your phone, dated and time-stamped. You start describing timelines in more and more granular detail, trying to prove, to a doctor, to a partner, sometimes even to yourself, that you aren't imagining any of it. Here's the wow moment. This specific type of rash, sometimes called urticarial vasculitis when it's tied to autoimmune activity, isn't ordinary hives, even though it can look almost exactly like them. Ordinary hives are typically a surface-level histamine reaction. This version involves actual inflammation of small blood vessels beneath the skin, a deeper, more structural process entirely. That distinction matters, because it's part of why the rash can behave so unpredictably, flaring and settling within hours rather than lingering for days the way a true allergic reaction usually would. The very timing that makes it so maddeningly hard to document for a doctor's appointment is the same timing that makes it a meaningful clue about what's actually happening beneath the surface. There's a specific kind of loneliness in this stage that's worth naming directly, because so many people who live through it never hear anyone say it out loud. It's the loneliness of being technically correct. The rash was real, the photos exist, the timeline is accurate, and still walking out of an appointment feeling like you failed to prove something that was never yours to prove in the first place. That feeling is common. It's also not a sign that you're overreacting. It's a sign that some symptoms are simply built to be difficult to catch. The frustration of the vanishing rash was never a sign that nothing was wrong. More often, it's a sign that the problem lives deeper than the surface, down in the blood vessels themselves. Which brings us to a mark that doesn't disappear quite so conveniently, and one that doctors take very seriously the instant they see it. Level 5. The tiny purple spots doctors never ignore. One ordinary morning, while pulling on a pair of socks, you notice something new scattered across your lower legs. Small purple-red dots, clustered like a faint constellation across the shins. They don't itch. They don't hurt. If you hadn't happened to glance down at exactly the right angle in exactly the right light, you might never have noticed them at all. Out of pure curiosity, you press one gently with a fingertip. It doesn't turn white and fade the way an ordinary red mark would under pressure. It stays exactly as purple as it was a second earlier. That small, almost accidental test, the finger press test, happens to be one that's genuinely used in medicine, because it tells you something meaningful. This isn't just surface redness caused by blood rushing to the area. This is purpura, a mark caused by blood actually leaking out of small vessels underneath the skin. Here's the wow moment. This kind of purpura in Sjogrens tends to show up specifically on the lower legs, and that isn't random chance, it's basic physics. Blood vessel inflammation, combined with the simple fact that blood pools lower in the body throughout an ordinary day of standing and walking, makes the lower legs the single most common site for these spots to appear. It's one of the very few skin symptoms in this condition with a genuinely predictable location, which is part of why experienced clinicians can sometimes recognize the pattern almost on sight, before a single test has even been run. The spots eventually fade on their own, but rarely into nothing. They often leave behind a faint brownish discoloration, a kind of residue from the vessels that were affected, a quiet paper trail written directly onto the skin, readable weeks after the original spots have gone. At this point, the whisper has become something closer to a formal notice. The skin isn't guessing anymore. It's documenting, methodically, in a shade of purple that's hard to explain away as anything else. If you search for this online, you'll find it described in clinical language: cutaneous vasculitis, palpable purpura, hypergammaglobulinemic purpura of Waldenstrom. Dense terms that sound frightening precisely because they're unfamiliar, not because the underlying reality is automatically dire. Knowing the name doesn't make the diagnosis. But it does make the pattern easier to describe accurately the next time you're sitting across from a doctor, trying to put words to something you've only ever seen on your own legs. And the next clue won't come from something you see by glancing in a mirror. It's something you'll feel with your own hands, somewhere you'd never think to check on purpose. Level 6. The lump you feel before you ever see it. You're applying lotion along your jawline, or adjusting an earring in front of the mirror, and your fingers brush against something that stops you cold. A small lump, just in front of your ear or along the side of your jaw, that you almost certain wasn't there the last time you checked. The mind goes to the worst possible place almost instantly. Lymphoma. Cancer. Something serious, hiding in plain sight this entire time. Take a breath, because here's the first thing worth knowing clearly: the overwhelming majority of lumps like this are not cancer. Most of the time, what you're feeling is your parotid gland, one of the major salivary glands, sitting just in front of the ear, swelling because it's inflamed, not because it's malignant. Here's the wow moment. Parotid gland swelling can actually be one of the very first visible signs of Sjogren's syndrome to appear, sometimes showing up even before someone consciously notices dry eyes or dry mouth in daily life. The gland swells as immune cells infiltrate tissue that's supposed to be quietly producing saliva around the clock. That swelling is essentially the body raising its hand and announcing, in the most literal way possible, that the moisture system is under attack in this specific location. That said, honesty matters here as much as reassurance does. People living with Sjogren's syndrome do carry a modestly increased lifetime risk of a specific type of lymphoma compared to the general population. That's precisely why any new, persistent lump, especially one that doesn't come and go, keeps slowly growing over weeks, or arrives alongside night sweats, unexplained weight loss, or a lingering low-grade fever, genuinely deserves a real medical evaluation, rather than either frightened self-diagnosis or casual dismissal. Most lumps like this are inflammation. Some aren't. The only honest way to tell the difference is to have it checked by someone qualified to look, not to guess in either direction. Notice something about this level that separates it from every level before it. Levels 1 through 5 all lived on the surface: texture, color, marks you could photograph. This one lives underneath, in tissue you can only access by touch, and it's also the first level where the stakes genuinely widen beyond irritation into something that requires an actual medical answer, not just a home remedy. That's not an accident in how this documentary is structured. It mirrors exactly how the condition itself tends to progress: outward signs first, then deeper ones, each one a little harder to dismiss than the last. The tissue just beneath the skin has just handed you one of its most serious messages yet. But the next clue isn't a lump at all. It's time itself, and the way your body quietly starts handling it differently than it used to. Level 7. The wound that quietly refuses to heal. It's such a small thing at first. A paper cut from an envelope. A minor scrape from a kitchen accident while chopping vegetables. The kind of injury you'd normally forget about within 3 or 4 days, barely worth a bandage by day 2. Except this time, 3 or 4 days pass, and the cut still looks almost exactly the way it did on the very first day. A week passes. Then 2. The edges are barely drawing closed. There's no obvious infection, no dramatic complication. It's simply healing at a fraction of the speed it always used to. This is one of the more unsettling levels, precisely because it turns something as mundane as the passage of time into a source of quiet, low-grade anxiety. You start noticing every small cut differently than before. Every scrape gets watched, almost timed, in a way that never used to cross your mind. Here's the wow moment, and it connects directly back to level 5 in a way that suddenly makes the whole story feel less like a list and more like a single continuous thread. Slower wound healing in Sjogrens is very often tied to the exact same blood vessel inflammation responsible for those purple spots on the legs. Skin repair depends heavily on healthy circulation, delivering oxygen, immune cells, and nutrients to the site of an injury quickly and efficiently, on a tight biological schedule. When small blood vessels are chronically inflamed, that delivery system slows down measurably, and a healing process that should take a matter of days can stretch out into weeks without anything else obviously going wrong. The skin isn't just displaying visible damage at this stage anymore. It's demonstrating, in real time, that its most basic self-defense mechanism, its ability to repair itself, is starting to falter under the same inflammation that's been showing up everywhere else in this story. There's something almost philosophical about this stage, even though it rarely gets discussed that way. Healing is one of the few processes in the human body we take entirely for granted. We assume it as a background guarantee, the same way we assume a light switch will turn a lamp on. Watching that guarantee quietly weaken doesn't just raise a medical question. For a lot of people, it's the first moment the condition stops feeling like an inconvenience and starts feeling like a genuine shift in how their body works. And when the ability to repair genuinely starts to fail, the next question becomes impossible to avoid. What happens when the skin stops protecting you altogether? Level 8. When your skin stops protecting you. At this stage, something shifts from being an inconvenience into being a genuine warning sign. A small sore, sometimes from nothing more dramatic than mild friction, a tight shoe, or a minor bump against furniture, doesn't just heal slowly this time. It breaks down further. It becomes an open ulcer, sometimes on the lower legs, sometimes at a pressure point, staying open far longer than any ordinary wound reasonably should. This is the point where skin stops being just an organ you moisturize out of habit and starts being recognized for what it has always actually been, a barrier. Its entire biological job, from the moment you're born, is to keep the outside world, bacteria, physical damage, moisture loss, firmly separated from everything happening inside your body. When that barrier stays broken open for an extended period of time, infection stops being a hypothetical worry and becomes a genuinely serious risk. Here's the wow moment. Skin ulcers that refuse to close are often one of the clearest visible signs that autoimmune inflammation has moved past being a mere irritation and started actively compromising a vital protective structure the body depends on every single hour of every day. Doctors take non-healing ulcers seriously for an intensely practical reason. An open wound isn't just uncomfortable to look at, it's an unguarded entry point into the body, and the usual local defenses at that specific site have, in a very real sense, gone offline. The practical advice at this stage is simple and worth remembering long after this video ends. Any wound that hasn't shown genuine, visible improvement after 2 to 3 weeks, especially one that's growing larger, discharging fluid, or surrounded by spreading redness, needs medical attention, not another round of over-the-counter ointment purchased on the way home. Doctors sometimes describe skin as the body's external report for exactly this reason, because when something goes wrong deep inside, internally, skin is frequently the first tissue capable of showing it externally, where anyone can see it, long before internal organs display any obvious sign of strain. An ulcer that won't heal isn't the leg failing on its own. It's the leg finally showing, in plain sight, something the rest of the body may have been managing quietly for a long time already. This is also the exact moment the entire story starts to shift shape. Because a wound that won't heal on the leg was never really just a story about the leg. This isn't just about skin anymore. Level 9. The day you realize it was never just about your skin. This is where every thread finally ties together, all at once, in a single quiet moment. Look back at everything so far. The rough patches that felt like nothing. The rash mistaken for eczema, twice. The burning where there used to be itching. The vanishing welts nobody else ever saw in person. The purple spots on the shins. The lump near the jaw that terrified you for exactly one night. The cut that wouldn't close in the usual 4 days. The sore that eventually turned into an ulcer. Now, place all of that next to things you may have been quietly dismissing in completely different parts of your life, for completely unrelated reasons. The fatigue that no amount of sleep seems to fully fix, no matter how early you go to bed. The joint pain that shows up reliably every morning and takes the better part of an hour to loosen. The dry eyes that make ordinary screen time feel harsher than it used to feel just a year ago. The dry mouth that has you reaching for a glass of water in the middle of the night, without fail, more nights than you'd ever admit out loud to a doctor unprompted. Individually, every single one of these has a perfectly innocent explanation available. Fatigue could just be stress, or a demanding season of life. Joint pain could be ordinary aging, or overuse from exercise. Dry eyes could be nothing more than too many hours in front of a screen. Dry mouth could be simple dehydration. Skin changes could be weather, or age, or just bad luck landing on the wrong patch of skin. But here's the wow moment, the one that quietly reframes everything that came before it in this documentary. Autoimmune conditions like Sjogrens rarely announce themselves with one single, dramatic, unmistakable symptom. They accumulate slowly and quietly across multiple systems at once, largely because each individual sign is genuinely easy to explain away entirely on its own, without ever needing to connect it to anything else. The skin symptoms walked through in this documentary were never actually a separate storyline running alongside the rest of your health. They were one chapter in a much longer book your body may have been writing for months, or even years. A book where fatigue, joints, eyes, mouth, and skin are simply different narrators, each describing the exact same underlying problem from a different room in the house. This is the moment the whisper finally becomes a complete sentence. Not 10 separate, unrelated complaints scattered across a calendar. One coherent message, spoken patiently in 10 different voices, waiting for someone to notice they were all saying the same thing. There's a reason this level is placed here, right before the finale, instead of at the very beginning of the documentary. If we had opened with this list, skin, fatigue, joints, eyes, mouth, all at once, it would have sounded like nothing more than a generic checklist, the kind you scroll past on a health website without absorbing a single line of it. But after walking through each piece individually, after sitting with the rough patch, the rash, the burning, the vanishing welts, the purple spots, the lump, the wound, and the ulcer one at a time, the checklist stops being generic. It becomes personal. It becomes recognizable. That's the entire purpose of structuring the story this way, not to frighten, but to make the pattern impossible to unsee once you've actually walked through it step by step. So the real question was never whether any single symptom, on its own, was dangerous enough to worry about. The real question is this: how do you know when it's finally time to stop watching, and simply call your doctor? Level 10. The moment your skin stops whispering, and starts asking you to listen. Here's the answer, said as plainly as it can be said. You don't need to wait for a single, undeniable, dramatic symptom before your concern is considered valid enough to act on. You don't need to check off 10 out of 10 signs from this list before it's worth a conversation with a professional. If you've recognized even 2 or 3 of these patterns somewhere in your own life, skin behaving strangely alongside fatigue, dryness, or joint pain that doesn't quite add up on its own, that alone is already enough reason to ask the question out loud, to someone qualified to actually test for it rather than guess. Your skin was never your enemy anywhere in this story. From the very first rough patch back in level 1, it was your messenger, quietly relaying information from deep inside your body, using the only language it has available to it: texture, color, sensation, and timing. Most people are only ever taught to read their own skin for beauty. Smooth or rough, clear or blemished, younger looking or aging. Almost no one is ever taught to read it as a diagnostic report, a running log of what's happening somewhere else in the body. But that's exactly what it can be, once you know what you're actually looking at, and once you know how to connect one small sign to the next. Recognize your own normal. Notice when something genuinely changes and, importantly, stays changed rather than resolving on its own within a reasonable amount of time. Don't panic over every single mark or bump that shows up on your skin. The honest truth is that most of them really do mean nothing at all. But don't dismiss an emerging pattern either, especially one that keeps quietly resurfacing alongside fatigue, dryness, or joint pain you can't otherwise easily explain away. If you're watching this and recognizing more of these levels than you expected to, here is the practical next step, stated plainly. Mention it to a doctor, in exactly the connected way this documentary just walked through it. Not "I have dry skin." Not "I have a lump near my jaw." Instead, something closer to, I've noticed dry skin, occasional rashes, fatigue, and dry eyes, and I'm wondering if these might be connected. That single sentence does more diagnostic work than any of the individual symptoms could ever do alone, because it hands the pattern directly to someone trained to recognize it. You were never being dramatic for noticing. You were paying attention. Sometimes your skin whispers. A little roughness here. A little itch there. Nothing that feels worth mentioning to anyone, let alone a doctor. Sometimes it speaks louder, a rash that won't behave itself, a wound that quietly refuses to close, a lump that won't let you ignore it for even one more day. And sometimes, if you're willing to let all of those separate moments sit next to each other instead of explaining each one away individually and moving on, you realize they were never actually separate at all. Your skin has been talking this entire time. Not to frighten you. Not to ruin your morning routine or make you afraid of your own reflection. Just to tell you the truth, a little at a time, in the only vocabulary it has: texture, color, sensation, timing, patiently waiting for someone on the other side of the mirror to finally learn the language. Now you know how to listen.